what do you see as the relationship, in particular, given that housing is such a big driver of the inflation that we've seen over the last few years? As Senator Hagerty said, the highest in 40 years. What role do you see illegal immigration playing in driving up housing costs, which of course is a main driver of inflation for American citizens?
Let me quickly start by echoing your first comment, which is we don't comment on immigration policy, but we do comment on inflation. So I would say this. Many people came into the country over the last couple of years, many of them through asylum requests, and went to work. Labor supply increased a great deal. It's not, there's no clear answer, but my sense is that in the long run, immigration is kind of neutral on inflation. In the short run, it may actually have helped because the labor market got looser because there were more people. But to you're talking about housing specifically. There will be, I'm sure there are places in the country where new people coming into the country, I'm sure you can find places and they exist where that will have contributed to an already tight housing market. But overall, in terms of aggregate inflation, I wouldn't say it's a driver one way or the other.
So I want to follow up on that thread, but just on that topic of particular areas that have been affected, Chairman Brown, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit a letter for the record from the city of Springfield and our state, the southwestern part of our state, which I think highlights a very real example of this particular concern, straight from the horse's mouth itself. Now this letter, I want to quote from it. Springfield has seen a surge in population through immigration that has significantly impacted our ability as a community to produce enough housing opportunities for all. Springfield's Haitian population has increased 15 to 20,000 over the last 4 years in a community of under 60,000 previous residents, putting a significant strain on our resources and ability to provide ample housing for all of our residents. And end quote there. And in my conversations with folks in Springfield, it's not just housing. They're trying to build 5,000 new housing units, which is a very Herculean task in a town of about 55,000 people, but it's also hospital services, it's school services, there are a whole host of ways in which this immigration problem, I think, is having very real human consequences. One of the euphemistic ways in which economists, I think, sometimes talk about labor supply and immigration is they'll say something to the effect of, well, an increase in labor supply has put downward pressure on labor prices. And what they're effectively saying is that increased immigration has put downward pressure on the wages of American workers. I wonder, when you hear sort of your colleagues and other economists outside of the Fed talk about the influx of immigration and the fact that it, I think, admittedly has put downward pressure on wages. Okay, so obviously that has put some downward pressure on inflation, but it also puts downward pressure on the wages that people earn to pay for their families. Why do we see that as a good thing? Or maybe that's wrong. Maybe the premise is fundamentally incorrect. But why do so many economists treat an influx of new labor as a good thing? If labor is constrained, labor supply is constrained, doesn't that lead to rising wages for American workers?
So I'm certainly not trying to put a value judgment on it. I will say that this is all happening over the last couple of years in a context of an extremely tight labor market. Now a little bit less tight, significantly less tight, but you've got a worker shortage. You've got businesses who have jobs that are open. You have, more than one job opening for every unemployed person. So you've got a very tight labor market, and it's addressing that. And we're having wage increases are still very high, but they're coming down to a more sustainable level.
I understand your point, Chair Powell, and again, I'm not ascribing value judgments to you, but if we say we have a really tight labor market and we say that there are more than one job openings per worker, there are two ways you could plausibly solve that, or probably more than that, but two obvious ways you could plausibly solve that. One is through a new influx of workers via the immigration system. Another way is by raising wages and bringing some of the workers that are on the sidelines. I'm thinking specifically of the 7 million prime-age men that have dropped out of the labor force. Like, why isn't that more the focus of policymakers? Rather than, you see a labor shortage, rather than bringing in a large number of new immigrants, why not try to boost wages in a way that brings some of those workers off the sidelines? That seems to be a much better focus from my perspective.
Certainly, that's a very constructive focus. I would agree. I don't think it has to be one or the other.